City of Johannesburg is reportedly spending an exorbitant amount of money for its council sittings. According to a News24 report, taxpayers cough up over 600,000 rands for a single sitting, with catering for one person costing 800 rands. Former Speaker Vasco da Gama joins us now for more. Vasco, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on. Who decides how much will be spent on a single council sitting?
Good evening, Kevin. Good evening to your listeners. Well, it all depends on what type of meeting it is, and whether it's a council sitting or a two-day council sitting, and obviously that is decided basically by the whips, in the sense that you look at the time that councillors are going to spend at a council meeting. If you remember well, between 2021 and in the middle of 2021, when we were still in the city, the costs were exorbitant, in the sense that you had meetings that were delayed because of all the shenanigans that goes on within council, and therefore your meetings would last up until 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock at night.
Yeah, and would that justify a cost of 800 rands per councillor for catering?
I don't think it's justifiable, because I believe, like anybody else that works and goes to work, you take your own lunch, you take your own sandwiches, and therefore it has been a plea from us that the cost to council meetings be reduced. But it's been impossible. I mean, in the time that I've been there, it really has been impossible, because you had extra security. In other words, you've got JMPD from 6 o'clock in the morning on a council day until 12 o'clock when you finish off with council meetings, just to protect councillors, because as you remember, both the EFF and the ANC were quite violent on some occasions, trying to take over the city. And through those shenanigans, there is a need to get councillors to feel safe, and therefore you've got to cater for, let's say, 100 JMPD officers plus your white shirts, which is about 30, including 270 councillors, officials, the city manager and his staff, and obviously those that are supplying IT services to the city, which is a cost to the city.
Yeah. What would it take? I mean, at some point we saw in 2020, for example, Parliament, one of the committees took the decision that there will be no catering for MPs because people are struggling at that time. Of course, it was COVID, people were not working, and it was just money that would have been served better, serving the people of the country. It was, I suppose, at the time, temporarily suspended. I don't know if that is still the case now, and I'm sure it is back on. But what would it take to have that kind of arrangement completely suspended?
Well, I think it would take, and obviously you cannot leave it over to councillors. It's the same as you asking councillors to decide on their salaries, whether they're going to get an increase or not. They are going to tell you that we do need an increase, the same as parliamentarians, exactly the same. And therefore, you need somebody else to take that decision on their behalf, including this issue around catering. We need some kind of legislation around this particular issue to start curbing the amount of money that is spent on councillors when they, in fairness, also goes to work like any other ordinary person. But obviously you've also got to ensure that you are able to meet them halfway when they work late hours. That has become a real problem, especially with our new coalition arrangements and stuff like that. I'm sure that the DA would have loved to have taken these decisions on their own, because definitely I think you can see the Cape Town arrangements and how they work with this completely different to how it's done in the city of Johannesburg.
Now, of course, there've been some issues with the building where council would sit. Does that add to the cost in terms of finding alternative venues?
No, I believe we're going back to the same council building. I mean, this shenanigans around JPC and the maintenance of the council building in itself has been going on for years. I had several discussions with the managing director of JPC, Helen Boters, including the current city manager and the previous city manager around the council building, how it's maintained, and what should be done to improve the maintenance around it. And the latest episode about them losing electricity within the building is completely I cannot understand it, because I know the building on the back of my hand. You know, some people are busy with funny business.
Yeah. Others arguing, Vasco, saying that the local government forms part of an essential building block of our democracy. In fact, it's a strong linkage point between society and those who exercise power in government, and therefore a cost of a meeting is negligible compared to the overall deployment of resources and municipal services which needs to be taken out there.
Well, I think local government spends money not just on councillors. Remember that we've got IDPs, and IDPs are legislated. You've got 135 wards throughout the city. You've got 135 councillor offices in each ward to ensure that you've got these councillors next to residents. In other words, where residents can walk into an office and talk to the councillor and try and resolve some of their issues. There's a lot of issues around maintaining a ward and ensuring that proper services are provided within that ward. But you also need that interaction with councillors. So the legislation says that you've got to ensure that the councillor has at least got some tea, sugar, and stuff like that, so that when there is visitors, he's able to at least give them tea. They've got monthly meetings with ward committees, and as you know, ward committees are paid a stipend to assist the councillor in ensuring that all corners of the ward, in fact, are serviced and serviced properly, but also them speaking on behalf of the residents to ensure that the city gets those messages at the end of the day as to what is wrong and what improvements they want throughout. But the IDP sessions happens throughout the city, and you invite the public. The public will be there for 3 to 4 hours, and therefore there's also a need to provide that food in the evening, which is a cost. So there's a lot of areas within local government, unlike parliament or either province, where the interaction with communities is less, and therefore sometimes there is no need to provide all these things that are required. But remember that all these things that I'm talking about is legislated, in the sense that there is circulars around what you can do and what you can't do. And within the budget, these things are budgeted for. But obviously the high costs that you are mentioning, for instance, 600,000 rand per sitting, is very high. And there you can expect there is some shenanigans around it, because the Speaker's office, the current Speaker's office, gets its catering from the theater. There's a company at the theater that provides these catering services, and one should look closer to it.
Now, would something, for example, like thresholds, particularly assessed, because most of these prolonged meetings you'd find happen during a motion of no confidence or maybe during a budget sitting. But generally, I mean, my assumption is that council business goes on without unnecessary delays, except in an instance when there is a motion of no confidence. So would something like a threshold put in place on motions of no confidence assist, I suppose, also in not having these long, frivolous sessions that are costing taxpayers so much?
I think it's ridiculous that you've got 16 motions to one council sitting. Completely unnecessary. There is processes within the city in each department to ensure that the rightful services are provided. These unnecessary requests from political parties in asking for motions on stuff that are already implemented within the city is completely unnecessary, and therefore your legal services is ill-advising the current speaker, and therefore the increase in the number of motions, which unfortunately lengthens the council meetings that we have, which is completely unnecessary. And these things can be curbed. I mean, you could limit the number of motions per political party in a number of ways, including the smaller political parties, to ensure that you have meetings that are shortened, number one, but that there is other ways of ensuring that the type of service that you're asking for within a motion is taken through the Section 79s. You've got sittings on a monthly basis on all Section 79s where you could have input on the type of issues that you want to raise in the motion.
So would you call, I suppose, at this particular point for some kind of investigation in terms of those amounts that are being branded about, even though the Speaker says at the beginning of August that sitting cost less than 400,000?
Yes, well, one should be asking for some kind of investigation. I myself have asked for details on the expenditure of these meetings. I've seen the figures, and some of it, I think it's really ridiculous. You can't have a 3-course meal. I mean, a meal, when you come in the morning, I have coffee at home before I go to work and have my sandwich. And most of the time, I don't eat at council meetings for the whole day, perhaps sometimes. I can take my own sweets and snacks with. And so I believe that all other councillors can do that. It's the political will that lies between the different whips within council to ensure that these things start changing. We are in very difficult times. I mean, when I look at my neighbors and people living around me, they can hardly afford a loaf of bread a day. I mean, a loaf of bread used to cost a few years ago less than 10 rand. It's now 20-something rand, which is completely ridiculous. And therefore, you know, it needs us to ensure that we work prudently with the residents' money. It is taxpayers' money at the end of it, and therefore one has to be careful what you do around it.
Appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on, former Speaker of the City of Johannesburg, Vasco da Gama.